In this video, I'm going to discuss some of the another item that I think it's important for accounting students and students of any program to take away with them. And this is a video in the series of important takeaways that I'd like for you to watch. And this topic is how we generalize from scientific research or academic research. And you, as an accounting practitioner, you might wonder what we do in terms of academic research and how it impacts you. And I've done this little simple illustration here so that you can understand in general terms how this works. I have here in red academic and scientific research being performed, and I put it in red on purpose, and I'll explain to you guys in a minute. And then somewhere in between academic research and this other phase, we start actually beginning to generalize from what we see in academic research. So, and I put this in yellow, sort of like a street light where we have red, yellow, and green. So we start generalizing carefully at this point from scientific research. And then as time passes, we are in the green area is kind of the idea here. And this is where you as accountants begin to use in practice what we have been working on in research for a long time. And this process is not applicable just to accounting. This applies to every type of research, whether that be medical research, engineering type research, it's the same. Okay, so, but I want you guys to understand this concept of generalizing. Okay, it's a big deal in our world, in everyday life. So let me illustrate what I mean by that. Suppose, and the illustration I'm going to do is based on a basic algebraic equation that you learned many years ago, you know, where y equals x, a whole bunch of x variables, right? So we could be looking at, in our world, y could be audit quality. What things affect audit quality? So if I'm a researcher, I might come up with a hypothesis of something that we don't know yet that affects audit quality. Okay, so it could be some new rule or mandate that is being proposed or something like that. And I come up with this hypothesis based on analyzing literature, based on theory, etc., and then I test it. Now, in this model, and don't worry about all these little items, but just so we have a more fully disclosed conversation here, is, you know, you have controls. These are things that you know affect audit quality from the past. So you have to include them in the model just because previous literature has indicated, or previous research has indicated, that these items affect audit quality. So it could be, you know, whether you are a CPA or not, okay? So if you are a CPA, audit quality is better versus you're not being a CPA. And of course, I'm trying to just give you a quick little example. And then there's always going to be error in the models because we can't fully explain everything. But what we try to do as researchers is explain one bit at a time, okay? Now, when I am exploring this X1 factor, whatever that may be, the practitioner, the CPA, working, doing audits, doing the everyday things in accounting, may not be aware of that research that I'm working on. And that is on purpose, okay? This connection between what the researchers are doing and what practitioners are using should not be a direct, quick link, okay? And let me give you a scenario that would make a lot of sense to you. In medical research, okay, when we look at whether a medicine affects some disease, we want to make sure those studies have been done in a controlled environment. We want to make sure that those studies are robust and are of high quality And we want to make sure we do a lot of studies before we want doctors to start prescribing that medicine. Okay, so it's a long process. And for us going, right now we are going through the COVID crisis, and we are very early in the research stages. So all these researchers out there are trying to figure out what COVID is all about, how to treat it. And just because one study finds one effect, it doesn't mean that we can start prescribing that immediately. We want to make sure that there's enough testing out there, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So here in my model, I have X1 as the thing that supposedly affects audit quality. Now, again, we're not going to send this information to practice, or you guys are not going to start using it yet. Then some other researcher redefines or more fine-tunes my finding and says, okay, X1 is a factor that affects audit quality, but if I partition it between X1A and X1B, so what can that be? That could be not only are you a CPA, but if you're a CPA and finished your master's degree versus a CPA that did not finish their master's degree, they might hypothesize that there's a different effect on audit quality. And that's continuing the same story that I started here, or that the researcher started here, and then somebody else is fine-tuning and indirectly reconfirming this, but at the same time partitioning it into more detailed information. So every researcher is breaking things down a little bit more and providing us with another learning opportunity about this X1 factor. And this process takes a long time. When I have had academic studies that have taken 3-4 years easily from the time I begin the actual work to the time it gets accepted in a journal. And part of that is because when we submit these studies, once this, the study itself can take a good year, and then once we start sharing our study at conferences with other accounting professionals, we get feedback, we get critiqued, we get asked questions, we're challenged, and that's part of the process because we need fresh eyes looking at this all the time. Eventually, we submit this to a journal. The journal will go through a pretty intense peer review process where other researchers look at our study and try to find holes in it. And the intention is not to critique you in a bad way. The intention is for us to find the truth, okay? And that's what research is all about. So eventually my study gets published, or whoever this researcher's study is, so they get published and other researchers start tackling the different aspects of that. So imagine if this takes 2-3 years easily, this other study is going to take another 2-3 years. If we partition further, so and I'm just pushing the boundaries here, but here's another researcher finds that X1A is important, but there's part 1 and part 2 of X1A. So I don't know what that could be. Okay, let's just for the sake of conversation, this could be. We said that X1A was a CPA that finished their master's, and that affects audit quality somehow. X1B was a CPA that that did not finish their master's, and that affects audit quality somehow. And I'm not trying to predict anything with that. I'm just sharing that so that we understand the models. So here, it might be somebody that says, okay, this is part 1. This is a CPA that finished their master's, but who had a really high GPA. And this is a CPA who finished their master's who had a low GPA. And that has a differing effect on audit quality. And you see here, I come up with another variation of it. So basically, this is all the different variations that, maybe that's not the right word. I was going to say attack. Don't attack, but expand on this original finding. So as enough studies out there are published, have been vetted, have gone through the peer review process, then we start feeling comfortable that eventually through this rigorous and time-consuming process, we start feeling comfortable that, you know what, there is something related with X1. There is something related with having a CPA and all these other variations here in terms of audit quality. With respect to what we're going through right now with COVID, for some of you, it might seem like this is a very slow process. And in any other moment in time where you have some disease that is being investigated, it can't be, we cannot conclude things in a matter of a couple months, 3 months, okay? It's a very time-consuming process, because when we get to this point here where we start using it in practice, we want to make sure that we feel comfortable that what we find is not just some random finding in one study, okay? Especially in the area of medicine. We've got to know what the counter effects are, whether it is beneficial or not, and we want to be very sure of it. So anybody that starts trying to infer anything from just a few observations is probably what's the right word? And I apologize. I'm trying to find the right word. It's probably just tricking themselves. I mean, it's the word. And the reason that is because we have to give research time to be able to decode all the little nuances. So understand that in an environment as difficult as COVID is, this is a time-consuming process, okay? And then eventually, as enough studies validate that X1 does work, does affect Y, then we start beginning to generalize, okay? And then we can start saying, oh, that might actually be something, that X1, whatever that may be. In your world of accounting, okay, let's put it into perspective in your world. You are often learning about things about your clients and about things in accounting, but what you are observing is just one or just a few observations. And while it might be tempting to generalize from that, because hey, you're right there on the battlefield figuring out what it is, that might be the effect that describes the 3 observations that you saw, but that may not be generalizable. So it's very important that we understand when we have that kind of evidence, anecdotal evidence, that we respect and have the professional responsibility of explaining that is just based on a few observations. Okay, and not many people do that. Some people just think that because they observe something that generalizes to the whole population, and that's not the case. So you might be in this world in practice where you observe a few things here and there, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with you describing what you observe, but it could be that you have clients that by coincidence and by a selection bias, because you cater to certain clients, have certain behaviors that are not generalizable. Maybe you take on the clients in a particular industry that are going through some hardship, right? And not all those type of clients are going through that hardship, but you specialize in that hardship. So maybe your evidence, your anecdotal observations are generalizable to that particular subset of firms. But nevertheless, you still would need to do more robust research regarding it. So as a professional, what can you do if you do find some effect that you are interested in understanding? Maybe you've gone to a few clients and you've observed something that you find very interesting and that you would like to share and generalize. First, go look and see if there are academic studies. There are several journals, academic journals, that publish this type of information, and maybe there are some studies out there that confirm what you have observed. Okay, and at that point, you can say, this is not only based on my observations, but this is also based on academic studies by X, Y, and Z authors. Okay, and at that point, you are doing a favor to the accounting world in general, because you are speaking with base, okay? And that's very important. So as time passes, as all these rigorous and time-consuming procedures are performed, eventually we get to a point where we feel comfortable enough to use this in practice, okay? So, the way I described it is we do research about something that might be used and then eventually gets used, okay? And it doesn't always have to be that way. It could also be that we have something that is already implemented in practice, and then we want to see if it actually affects the financial statement users or whatever the interested party is in the way that we expected it. Okay, so it can go both ways. But do understand that the process of generalizing is one that requires you to be a professional and follow the responsibilities of how research eventually becomes used in practice. And I hope that helps you. Let me give you an example of something in practice that you might be able to relate to. Okay, so here's a study that I did with some authors from a couple other universities. And here's, speaking of audit quality, and I chose that on purpose just so we can kind of tie into this study here. This is a study that looked at what audit quality effects of an individual audit engagement partner signature. In other words, if you perform an audit and we require the partner in charge to actually sign their own name, does that affect audit quality? So, the requirement is if you work for Ernst & Young and you finish the audit and you provided the opinion letter, it's signed by Ernst & Young, but it's not signed with the name of the actual partner. So the regulators were looking into whether this would be a good idea or not to include that. And why were they thinking that? Well, there's theory in psychology, accountability related theory, that says, hey, listen, if somebody puts their name on something, they feel a little bit more obligated to perform better. Okay, so that's what the regulators were basing things on, or partially basing things on, in proposing this mandate to include the name of the audit engagement partner. So myself and these other co-authors, we discussed this and we said, psychology theory has a place and it makes a lot of sense, but there's also economic-based theory that we relied on, and we said there's already enough exposure to the partner, like legal exposure, litigation exposure, that would motivate that partner to act appropriately, whether they wrote their name or not. Okay, that was our argument, and we were basing it on economic theory. So we hypothesized, so let me show you just quickly what an academic study would look like. We look at all the previous studies that have looked at this topic. That's where you see the background research and all that. So we're reading all these studies, and that's what conducting research is, okay? You look at all these studies that have been done on it, and based on those old studies, you figure out what it is that has not been explained. And what we thought had not been explained was simply the fact that there's enough of an economic incentive by the auditor, the partner, to perform well, independent of whether they put their name or not. Okay, so this is where our research question states, does the adoption of a mandatory audit engagement partner signature requirement affect audit quality? And that's what we look at. So when we look at this, we have to, and I don't want to get into too many details here, but we have to define what audit quality is. How do we measure audit quality? And we have several ways that we define audit quality. So we use things related to accruals. So if a company does a lot of accruals, and I'm oversimplifying this, but if they do more accruals than is expected, then we start saying that is less audit quality. If the company has a higher probability of here's it is, benchmark earnings targets. If they have a higher probability of meeting a benchmark than the average company, then we start saying, oh, maybe that is pushing the envelope, okay, in terms of some earnings management. So several different, you have to operationalize that idea, audit quality, in numbers. So we have several measures of that. And we have our models that look at all these things. And in this, like, look at this one here. So here's X1, here's the variable of interest. And all these other items are like the control variables that we already know affect audit quality. Just like when I illustrated this right here in this very simple model right here. Okay? I'm doing the same thing. And we are looking at whether this affects audit quality. And actually this is accruals, but just to oversimplify here, whether this actually has an effect on why, even after all these things described here that we know in the past affected. And if it does, then we can conclude something, and if it doesn't, we can conclude something else. So here are the results, and we're not going to go crazy in looking at these results, but in our paper, we found that as we expected, based on our intuition and based on economic theory, we found that the signature mandate would not affect audit quality. Now, since we find no results, that's what would be considered no results, we had to test this from every single possible angle to make sure that we don't find anything at all, because it's actually tougher to say that you don't find results than it is to say you find results. So in other words, you have to defend the non-finding more than the finding. And that might sound counterintuitive, but that's kind of how it works. All right. So here's the study. Okay. What do regulators do? Like we should do as professionals, right? Remember I told you here, you eventually start informing yourself of these studies so that you start thinking about whether you can use this in practice. And as time passes and as studies confirm and we can generalize, then you start using it. So not just you using it, it's also the regulators that start looking at these studies and get influenced by that. So with this particular study, the PCAOB, this was a time when the PCAOB was proposing to amend auditing standard to require registered public accounting firms to disclose the name of the engagement partner in the audit report. Okay, so our study was very timely and was trying to help regulators in making this decision. So the PCAOB what they do is they look at all these studies. Let me see if I can get it. How do you find it? Well, for some reason it's not working. The find feature is not working. I don't know why. Let me reset it. Maybe that'll do it. Bear with me here. Oh, there we go. So look at this footnote here. This is a footnote on the PCAOB report citing our paper and many other papers, okay? And this is what I want to make clear to you guys. So this is not only our research, but the research of other individuals, some anecdotal evidence from certain firms, because everybody provides input here. So when I say that your anecdotal evidence here is not generalizable, well, it may or may not be, okay? But you have to understand your place. Your place is based on a few observations, whereas the place of the academic researcher is based on a big sample that allows us to generalize. We look at sometimes the whole population, all right? And we try to grab the whole population so that we can generalize. So in this particular PCAOB report on this, they're looking at all the academic studies like ours. They're looking at anecdotal evidence from maybe a partner at Ernst & Young, etc. And all these components are part of the subset of items that they use to come up with their ruling, okay? At the end, the PCAOB decided against the audit partner signature requirement. Okay, and in part it was based on our findings and the findings of many other researchers. But this doesn't happen overnight. Okay, this takes a long time, and that's where I want you guys to understand this. Whether it is accounting research we are talking about, medical research, any type of research, you must understand and be respectful of the process so that you don't oversimplify a particular piece of evidence, or you don't oversimplify a finding based on one observation or just a few observations. All right, hopefully this video was helpful to you guys, and I will add a few more as I think about them.